Beliefs of Hebrew Israelites. Number one is we are the Israelites. Number two is the Jews are fakes. The Jews are fakes. They are frauds, ethnic and religious frauds. If you could pass this book around, it's called The Jewish Masquerade. It's all about Jews being frauds. Now, how do they do that? How do they do that? Let's go to Revelation. Let's go to Revelation chapter 2. Let's see, let's go to chapter 2. Revelation chapter 2, verse 9. I know your tribulation and your poverty, but you are rich, and the slander of those that say they are Jews and are not, but a synagogue of Satan. That's those so-called fake Jews, but they're really a synagogue of Satan. Revelation 2:9 tells you, right? Well, who's that talking about there, people? Who is Revelation 2:9 talking about? Anybody? What's going on here? Well, there's a similar verse actually in Revelation, chapter 1 as well. Chapter 3. Chapter 3. Behold, I will make those of the synagogue of Satan who say that they are Jews but are not, but lie. Behold, I will make them come and bow down before your feet. Those fake Jews are going to bow down before us, they'll say. I mean, you're going to look at them and how are these white people going to live over in the Middle East? They get all burnt. It can't be those modern day Jews. It's got to be us. Well, this gets a little bit into Jewish history. First of all, what does Titus 3:9 say? Don't waste your time on foolish genealogies. Hebrew Israelites, God bless their soul, are obsessed with genealogies. Titus 3:9 and other places say it's a waste of time. That's not what we're supposed to be caught up with. When they ask me who are the Jews, so some of you won't like my answer. I believe it's essentially, yes, some of you can drop off right here. Essentially, the answer is the church. Galatians 6:16 says, the Israel of God, and it's referring to the church. Now, you may have a different answer, so you got to work through how you're going to answer that. But the Bible, even wherever you fall in this, Romans 9 through 11, what's Paul say? Not all who are Israel are Israel. So it's not a matter of an ethnic element in the first place, is it? It's a matter of circumcision outwardly? No, circumcision of the heart. Guess what? This is a biblical idea. In John, do you remember what Jesus says to the Jewish leaders of his day? What does Jesus call them in John 8? What's he say about them? Anybody remember? Jesus is having a little debate here. And it's very interesting what they're talking about. Anybody remember what he says about them? Huh? Well, that is one thing. Yep. And he also says, hold on, no, where did that exact verse go? My goodness. Hold on. Oh, I know what I did here. Hold on. I'm going to show you in a second here, but do you remember where? Yeah, what verse is that? It's on John 7, actually. Do you know the verse top of the head? There, I knew it was somewhere in there. So John 8:39. Thank you, Arthur. Appreciate that. What does he say here? John 8:39. Jesus says, if you were Abraham's children, you would be doing the works Abraham did, but now you seek to kill me, a man who has told you the truth that I heard from God. This is not what Abraham did. You were doing the works your father did. Verse 44. You are of your father, the devil. Is Jesus talking to modern day Jews like Seinfeld or something in there? No. Who's he talking to? The Jews of his day in the first century, right? Were they fake Jews? Whoa. Depends what you mean by that. Who does he say their father is? Now, does he mean literally that, well, some of you might believe that. My goodness, I don't know what you believe. But does he mean, do you think that Satan had sex with a bunch of women and produced all these guys? What's he say? He says, because you do the same works as him, right? You're not doing what did Abraham do? Believe. Genesis. Abraham believed God and it was counted to him for righteousness. Genesis 22 is the binding. Akedah in Hebrew. That's where the binding of Isaac happens. Way back in Genesis 15, though, Yahweh said, it was counted to him righteousness because he believed. My point, it wasn't after Abraham did something, although his doing was a product of his belief. Back here, he believed and was counted to him for righteousness. It was his belief that was counted as righteousness. So if you have the same faith of Abraham, the Bible says you are following the pattern of Abraham. That means you're truly a son of Abraham versus these guys who are following the devil. So who was the one that God used to write Revelation? John. Put John and Revelation together, it's actually the same theme. Revelation says, synagogue of Satan, saying that the Jews of Jesus' day who persecuted the church because they rejected Jesus are in league with Satan, not with God, even though they would claim to be. That's why they're at the synagogue. He's saying that's like a synagogue of Satan over there. It's not saying they're ethnic frauds in a literal sense. This is the biblical theme. Also, Revelation is written like in the 90s. So they're trying to tell you already the Jewish population had been replaced by a bunch of European-looking people. Sometimes they'll say, no, but it was for the future. I'm saying, so that verse has no meaning to them then because they don't know. What do you mean synagogue is Satan? They're like, that guy, they look just like us. They don't, right? Now this gets a little confusing. I'm going to have to do the quick version. First of all, I do not believe it ethnically matters according to the Bible in the same way that a lot of people think it does about ethnic claims to who's who. You can't even exactly tell anyway. But what happened? 70 AD, the Jews rebelled against Rome. Rome kicked them out. They did it again. 135 AD, Bar Kokhba rebellion. They rebelled, got kicked out, spread all over. Some stayed in Israel. Those are called the Mizrahi Jews. M-I-Z-R-A-H-I. These are Jews who stayed in the Middle East. We don't know them usually. Why? Well, because they stayed in the Middle East. The Jews we usually know in America are usually what are called Ashkenazi Jews. Hebrews think it's funny to say Ashkenazi Jews. A lot of them think that's funny. Ashkenazi just means Jews who went through Europe and ended up wherever they ended up. Because remember, Jews went everywhere after these rebellions and they were kicked out, right? Some of them went into Europe. What happens? And those aren't the only, there's Sephardic, usually Spain and Northern Africa. So there's different, and they look and have practices often somewhat like their cultural neighbors. Why? Intermarriage is allowed in Judaism. Proselytes are allowed in Judaism. So after 2,000 years, you're not going to look exactly the same. That's why when we think of Jews, a lot of times we do think white people. That's not right from 2,000 years ago. You're seeing the product of a lot of times Eastern Europeans plus some Semitic peoples. But you got to open up your mind. The Sephardic, the Mizrahi, the Yemenite Jews. Google Yemenite Jews. You'll think, oh, that's probably what Jesus looked like. They don't look like Larry David. They look very different. Why? Because they stayed much closer to that geographical area. Now, this is a basic understanding of what happened. So when we think of Jews white, that's not right, especially back then. But as you go through where you go through, you come out on the other end kind of looking like your neighbors. Now, we're used to seeing Jews from the Eastern European side. I'm not saying I don't have any ethnic ties. What I'm saying is they've been filtered through something. But that's not the only place Jews went. Some went down all the way into South Africa and Zimbabwe, the Limba, and they look somewhat like their African neighbors. Now, they're the exception to the rule. Hebrews want you to think it's kind of all over the continent. Not true. And by the way, if they're in South Africa, that's not really relevant to West Africa, which will make it relevant to the transatlantic slave trade. So the Limba having Semitic DNA does not equal the West Africans have Semitic DNA. Do you see? That's bizarre. This Limba tribe in South Africa, some of their haplogroups, especially the J, match up with Ashkenazi. You could have Woody Allen next to a Limba look totally different, and they would share a unique haplogroup. Sometimes these are what's called population studies, meaning in any given population, nobody's everything. Nobody's the same exactly, right? So are there people who are descendants of Jew, would say I'm a Jew, who are actually descendants of converts or super watered down? That's most likely true. Some who may have almost be like fully Eastern European, for example. Yes, and it's very difficult to trace all this stuff exactly. But when you do population studies, are there people who have what's called Semitic DNA? Yes. Now that's even tricky, the Semitic DNA thing, because Arabs have very similar DNA. Why? Well, in general, Esau, Ishmael, you see what I'm saying? These are folks related to them, so there's not a lot of distinctions. There are some distinctions, specifically something called the Cohen modal haplotype. And that is something that's distinct to people who have last names dealing with the priestly clan, Cohen, Levi, these names. A lot of times those folks have a unique signature that seems to indicate they're descendants of Aaron. Now, just because your last name's Cohen doesn't mean you've got it, though. Sometimes you can get the last name without being it. So again, this is super complicated. Hebrewites like to smash all the complication out of the way, trick you and say they're all fakes. Do you think white people were running around back then? Now, the Jews of Jesus' day, they probably didn't look white because they hadn't been dispersed yet. You can get a little bit of how they look. Check this out. By looking at Egyptians of the day. Well, why would I do that? How can I look at Egyptians from the 1st and 2nd century? Well, Paul was mistaken for an Egyptian. But if you think Egyptians equals someone who looks like, say, what would be called a Nubian, you might be wrong. How do you know? The Egyptians of the 1st century like to do something. What do? Painted their faces, an artist, on the outside of their sarcophagus. It's called the Fayum mummy portraits, F-A-Y-U-M. And you can see what they look like. And they're dark brown, some a little lighter, some a little darker. We can see what modern Egyptians, I'm not saying they're Jews, I'm saying 1st century, 2nd century Egyptians look like. Well, if you generally know what they look like, you're generally close to maybe what some of the Israelites of the day look like, because Paul was mistaken for an Egyptian. But they try to say, well, aren't Egyptians African? So therefore, Israelites are black too. But if you look at Egyptians of the 1st century, they weren't black like that. And when the Egyptians portrayed themselves, even on their walls back in the day, they portrayed Nubians as darker than them, and they portrayed the Semites as lighter than them. Now, Hebrewites would disagree with a lot of what I'm saying, but I've looked into this because I look into their claims. You can do the same thing, and you'll see, okay, so the world is bigger than black and white. Don't think like Jim Crow. If you think, if they're not black, they must be white. If they're not white, they must be black. What are you, crazy? What are you talking about? People didn't even think that way prior, really, to Jim Crow. We're stained a lot of times by the product of American racism, this whole one drop and all this kind of stuff. The world is not like that. I mean, do you know anyone from the Middle East? What are they? Are they black or white? Doesn't even really make sense to talk that way, right? What about super dark Sicilians? What are they? You know, there's all these kind of questions. So that kind of thinking is silly, but that's what the Hebrews like to try to do. So hear what they'll say. They will say, we are true Israel. Very important belief. The Jews are frauds or fakes. Now look, for me, I don't sit around defending because I'll say, look, whether or not any Jewish person is descended from Jacob, they need to know Jesus. That's my emphasis with them. And so do you. They're kind of, a lot of Hebrewites are sort of obsessed with modern day Jews. It's like this. They think the pie's not big enough for both of them. You know the old, this town's not big enough for both of us, right? That's how they seem to think. So if they're legit, we're not legit, we're legit, therefore they're frauds. So there's a strong anti-Semitism in Hebrew Israelism, regardless of what they say. They'll say, oh, how can I be an anti-Semite? I'm a Semite. Well, remember, they're begging the question. It's not really likely they are Semitic, number one. Second, you can be self-hating or hate other people who are descended from a similar family tree, so it's kind of a silly argument. In fact, on a Hebrew Israelite reckoning, if white people are the descendants of Esau and black folks are the descendants of Jacob, the twins, right? So if Jacob's descendants are Semites, who else are Semites? White folks, according to their logic. I'm not saying in reality, people, okay? So you can be anti-Semitic because most Hebrewites ain't feeling white people, I'll just put it that way. So they're anti-Semitic towards white folks because they think they're Semites. See what I'm saying? So, a lot there. This is why you see why Hebrews can trick somebody, because they make a bunch of false claims. You may not be aware of what's happening back here, and then they'll say something, show you a couple verses, and you are, let me show you.